The letter from the Social Security Administration felt heavier than paper should. I stared at the official seal, my hands trembling not from my condition this time but from pure dread. Routine review of benefit allocation, it said in sterile government font. Routine. Nothing about my family had been routine since the accident. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'd been getting disability benefits for 3 years, since the drunk driver turned my spine into a jigsaw puzzle and my dreams of becoming a physical therapist into a memory. The settlement had been substantial, but it was tied up in legal proceedings. The monthly disability payments were supposed to keep me afloat until then, covering my medical equipment, medications, and basic living expenses while I figured out how to rebuild a life from a wheelchair. My older sister Janet had been so helpful when I first came home from the rehabilitation center. She'd moved back into our childhood home where I was staying temporarily, helping me navigate the maze of paperwork, medical appointments, and benefit applications. She understood the system, she said. She'd handle the financial stuff so I could focus on healing. Sweet, responsible Janet with her accounting degree and her gentle way of taking charge when everything felt overwhelming. That was before I found out about the lake house. The benefits came to around $4,000 a month, which sounds like a lot until you factor in that my medications alone cost $1,200, the special mattress to prevent bed sores was a monthly rental, and the physical therapy sessions that kept me functional weren't fully covered by insurance. Still, it was enough. Enough to live with dignity while I fought to regain some independence. I should have wondered why Janet never seemed stressed about money anymore. She'd lost her job at the accounting firm right before my accident, something about budget cuts, and had been struggling to make rent on her downtown apartment. But suddenly she was talking about investment opportunities and showing me brochures for adaptive equipment I didn't need. Top-of-the-line stuff that cost thousands more than the basic versions that worked just fine. You deserve the best, Danny, she'd say, pushing catalogs across my adjusted table. After what you've been through, why settle for adequate when we can get you premium? I thought she was being supportive. I thought she wanted me to have every advantage in adapting to my new reality. I was grateful, actually grateful, that someone cared enough to research all these options, to push for the highest quality everything. The deluxe wheelchair that cost $8,000 when my insurance-covered one worked perfectly. The smart home system that automated everything when I was perfectly capable of reaching light switches and door handles. The high-end hospital bed when the standard one was fine. It wasn't until Mom mentioned the lake house that the pieces started clicking together. We were having one of our awkward monthly dinners, where everyone pretended my presence in the wheelchair wasn't completely disrupting the natural flow of conversation, when Mom brought up Janet's new property. Janet, you'll have to show Danny pictures of the cabin when renovation's finished, Mom said, cutting her roast with the precision of someone avoiding eye contact. 2 bedrooms, private dock, completely updated kitchen. It's gonna be beautiful. I looked at Janet, who had suddenly developed an intense interest in her mashed potatoes. Cabin? It's just a small place up at Lake Morrison, she said quickly. Founded at a foreclosure auction. Perfect investment opportunity. Vacation rental market is booming up there. Lake Morrison was a 3-hour drive into wine country, where tech executives and city lawyers built weekend retreats that cost more than most people's houses. I'd looked at rentals there once for a weekend getaway before my accident. Even the modest cabins started at $500,000. Foreclosure auction, I repeated slowly. Those are cash only, aren't they? Usually, yes. Her voice was getting smaller. Where did you get that kind of cash, Janet? You were unemployed when I had my accident. The silence stretched until Dad cleared his throat and launched into a story about his golf game, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was doing math. Rough, terrible math that made my stomach clench. After dinner, I rolled myself to Janet's old room where she'd been sleeping since moving back in. Her laptop was open on the desk, and I could see multiple browser tabs open to home improvement websites. Kitchen renovations starting at $30,000. Dock repairs and updates. Property management companies for vacation rentals. Danny, what are you doing in here? Janet appeared in the doorway, and for the first time since my accident, she looked at me like I was an intruder instead of her baby brother who needed protection. Just curious about this cabin, I said casually. How much did it end up costing? The whole project? She started tidying papers that didn't need tidying. It's complicated. There's the purchase price, renovation costs, property taxes, insurance. It all adds up. Ballpark figure. Danny, why does it matter? It's my investment. With what money? The question hung in the air like smoke. I had some savings. From your job that you lost right before my accident. I had been saving for years. For a $500,000 lake house. It wasn't $500,000. Her voice was sharp now, defensive. And it's none of your business how I manage my finances. But it was my business, wasn't it? Because Janet wasn't just my sister helping out of the goodness of her heart. She was my representative payee. When the Social Security Administration determined that my cognitive function might be impaired due to the traumatic brain injury that had accompanied my spinal damage, they'd appointed her to manage my benefit payments. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I proved I could handle my own finances again. That was 2 years ago. As my representative payee, every dollar of my disability benefits came to her first. She was supposed to use the money for my needs, keep detailed records, and file annual reports with Social Security about how the funds were spent. I'd trusted her completely. She was my sister. She'd held my hand through the worst months of my life. She'd researched every piece of equipment, every treatment option, every adaptation that might help me reclaim some normalcy. She'd also been spending my money on a lake house. That night, I called the Social Security Administration's representative payee helpline. The automated system tried to direct me through 15 different menu options before I finally reached a human being who sounded like she'd rather be anywhere else. I'd like to request copies of my representative payee reports, I said. Those reports are filed by your payee, not sent to you directly. But they're about my benefits. Don't I have a right to see where my money is going? A pause, typing. You can request copies through your local office. You'll need to fill out Form SSA 623 and provide identification. What if I suspect my representative payee is misusing my benefits? The typing stopped. Her voice became more focused. Sir, are you reporting suspected representative payee fraud? The word fraud hit me like a physical blow. My sister wasn't committing fraud. She was just... What was she doing exactly? I'm not sure, I said honestly. I just want to see the reports. I can connect you with our Office of Inspector General if you'd like to discuss concerns about benefit misuse. My hands were shaking again. Let me start with just getting copies of the reports. 3 days later, I had an appointment at the local Social Security office. Janet offered to drive me, like she always did, but I told her I'd arranged for a medical transport. I needed to do this alone. The clerk handed me 2 years' worth of representative payee reports, and I spread them across the accessible table in the consultation room. Janet's neat handwriting documented every expense. Rent, utilities, groceries, medical supplies, equipment purchases. It all looked legitimate at first glance. Then I started adding up the equipment costs. The $8,000 wheelchair that my insurance had actually covered completely. The smart home system that cost $6,000, installed in a house I was planning to leave as soon as I found accessible housing. The premium hospital bed rental at $300 a month when the standard version was $80. Every single item was the most expensive option available, and every single item was something I'd never asked for. Janet had researched the options, presented them to me as recommendations, and I trusted her judgment. But now I was looking at thousands of dollars in unnecessary expenses, all documented as legitimate disability-related costs. The pattern was subtle but consistent. She wasn't stealing the money outright. She was inflating every expense, choosing premium options over basic ones, and pocketing the difference. The smart home system had cost $6,000 according to her reports, but when I called the company, they told me the basic system I actually needed would have been $2,000. The wheelchair she'd documented at $8,000 was the top-of-the-line racing model, when the standard-powered chair I needed cost $3,000. For 2 years, she'd been systematically overcharging my benefits and using the extra money to fund her own life. The lake house was just the most obvious result. I sat in that sterile government office, surrounded by forms and receipts, and realized that my own sister had been stealing from me since the day I'd become too broken to notice. She'd taken advantage of my trust, my confusion in those early months, and my gratitude for her help to systematically drain the benefits that were supposed to keep me alive and independent. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was that she'd made me complicit in my own exploitation. Every time I'd thanked her for researching options, every time I'd praised her dedication to getting me the best equipment, I'd been celebrating her theft from my own future. I wheeled out of that office with a folder full of evidence and a phone number for the Office of Inspector General. The letter I'd received about the routine review suddenly made perfect sense. Someone had been paying attention to Janet's reports, and the numbers weren't adding up. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. "How did the appointment go? Everything okay with your benefits?" Everything was definitely not okay with my benefits. But she was about to find out just how not okay things were about to become. Part 1 ends here, but the real story was just beginning. The Office of Inspector General doesn't mess around. Agent Maria Gutierrez arrived at my door exactly 48 hours after I'd filed my complaint, wearing a crisp navy suit and carrying a briefcase that meant business. She had the kind of direct gaze that made you want to confess things you hadn't even done wrong. "Mr. Coleman, I understand you have concerns about your representative payee arrangement," she said, settling into the chair across from my wheelchair in the living room where Janet had been taking care of me for 2 years. I handed her the folder I'd compiled, bank statements I'd requested from my own accounts, receipts I'd gathered by calling vendors directly, price comparisons I'd researched online during sleepless nights when the pain medication wasn't enough to quiet my racing mind. "My sister has been systematically overcharging my disability benefits," I said. "She's been buying premium equipment and services, documenting them at inflated prices, and pocketing the difference." Agent Gutierrez spread the documents across the coffee table Janet had bought with money that was supposed to be feeding me. She worked in silence for 20 minutes, occasionally making notes or taking photos with her phone. "Mr. Coleman, based on these preliminary findings, we're looking at approximately $68,000 in questionable expenses over 24 months, she said finally. "That's enough to warrant a full investigation. $68,000. More than a year's worth of my benefits. Money that was supposed to ensure I had food, medication, housing, and the basic equipment I needed to function. Money Janet had diverted to fund her real estate dreams, while I thanked her for being so thorough in researching my options. "What happens now?" I asked. "We'll need to interview your sister and examine all financial records related to your benefits. The investigation typically takes 3 to 6 months. During that time, your benefits will be frozen until we can establish a new payee arrangement." Frozen. My stomach dropped. What am I supposed to live on? "Do you have family who can provide temporary support?" I almost laughed. The family who could provide temporary support was the family currently under investigation for stealing from me. Agent Gutierrez seemed to understand my silence. "We can expedite the process of having your payee status transferred to a qualified organization or another family member if there's someone appropriate." "There isn't anyone appropriate," I said quietly. It was just me and Janet against the world after Dad had his stroke and Mom moved to Arizona. That's why I trusted her. The investigation moved faster than I'd expected, probably because Janet had documented everything so meticulously. When you're committing fraud through inflated expenses rather than outright theft, detailed records actually work against you. Every receipt she'd kept, every report she'd filed, every bank transaction she'd made in my name, created a paper trail that screamed systematic abuse. I didn't tell Janet about the investigation at first. I couldn't figure out how to bring it up. How do you ask your sister if she's been stealing from you while wiping your forehead during physical therapy sessions? How do you confront someone who's been sleeping in the next room, bringing you meals, driving you to appointments, all while systematically draining your future? The answer came when she found Agent Gutierrez's business card on my desk. "Danny, what is this?" Janet's voice was tight with something I'd never heard before. Not concern for my well-being, but fear for herself. "Social Security is doing a review of my benefits," I said, not quite lying but not telling the whole truth either. "What kind of review?" "I file all the reports on time." Everything is documented properly. That's what they're reviewing. She sat down heavily in the chair Agent Gutierrez had occupied 2 days earlier. Danny, you don't understand how complicated this is. Managing someone else's benefits, making sure you get everything you need, dealing with all the paperwork and requirements. I've been doing this for 2 years without any compensation. Without any compensation? The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Janet, you've been living rent-free in this house that my benefits pay for. You've been eating food that my benefits buy. You've been driving a car that's insured and maintained with my benefits money. That's not compensation, that's basic living expenses while I take care of you. What about the lake house? The silence that followed was answer enough. How did you find out about that? She asked finally. Mom mentioned it. Then I started adding things up. The equipment costs, the inflated prices, the unnecessary upgrades. Janet, you bought yourself a lake house with money that was meant to keep me alive. It's not that simple. Then explain it to me. Make it simple. She stood up and started pacing, which would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. Her legs working perfectly while she tried to justify stealing from someone who couldn't walk away from the conversation. The lake house is an investment, she said. Vacation rental properties generate income. I was creating a revenue stream that would benefit both of us long term. With my money. With money I was managing for you. Money I was using to secure our future. Our future? Janet, these are my disability benefits. They're not venture capital for your real estate portfolio. You don't understand business, Danny. You don't understand investments or property markets or long-term financial planning. I understand theft. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She stopped pacing and looked at me directly for the first time since finding the business card. It's making sure we both have something when your settlement money finally comes through. It's creating stability for a family that's been through hell. It's thinking beyond just getting through today. It's fraud, Janet. It's benefit fraud, and it's going to destroy both of us. The next weeks blurred together in a haze of interviews, document requests, and uncomfortable family conversations. Agent Gutierrez was thorough and professional, but every question she asked felt like another nail in the coffin of my relationship with the only family I had left. Mom flew in from Arizona when Janet finally told her about the investigation. She arrived with a suitcase full of righteous indignation and a complete refusal to understand the situation. Danny, how could you turn on your own sister? She demanded the moment she walked through the door. After everything Janet has done for you, everything she's sacrificed, you're going to let the government destroy her life? She destroyed her own life by stealing from me. She didn't steal anything. She managed your money responsibly and made smart investments for your future. With money that wasn't hers to invest. She's your sister. Your money is her money when you can't manage it yourself. That hurt more than the original betrayal. The assumption that I was too broken, too compromised, too dependent to have any say in my own financial future. The belief that being in a wheelchair somehow made me less capable of understanding when someone was robbing me blind. Mom, she bought herself a vacation rental property with my disability benefits. That's not managing my money responsibly. That's called embezzlement. Don't use those words about your sister. What words should I use? Creative accounting? Aggressive financial planning? She stole from me, Mom. For 2 years, she's been stealing from me while I thanked her for taking such good care of me. The breaking point came when the Social Security Administration temporarily suspended my benefits, pending the completion of the investigation. No money meant no medication, no physical therapy, no equipment maintenance, no groceries. Janet had been managing every aspect of my financial life, and now that the tap was turned off, I discovered just how completely dependent I'd become. This is what you wanted, Janet said when I asked her to help me apply for emergency assistance. You wanted to be independent, make your own decisions. Well, here's your independence. I wanted to not be stolen from. There's a difference. I can't help you anymore, Danny. My lawyer says any financial assistance I provide now could be seen as obstruction of justice. So you're abandoning me. You abandoned me first when you filed that complaint. I spent the next 3 months learning what real independence looked like. It looked like rationing pain medication because I couldn't afford refills. It looked like skipping physical therapy sessions and watching my mobility deteriorate. It looked like eating canned soup for every meal because fresh food was too expensive, and I couldn't get to the store anyway. Friends helped when they could, but everyone has their own problems, their own budgets, their own limits. The church mom had suggested offered prayers and casseroles but couldn't pay for medical equipment or prescription drugs. The community resources Janet should have connected me with years ago were overwhelmed and underfunded. I lost weight. Not the healthy kind of weight loss that comes from improved diet and exercise, but the gaunt, hollow-cheeked weight loss that comes from not having enough food. My skin developed the pale, waxy look of someone whose body is consuming itself for fuel. The pressure sores that the expensive mattress had been preventing started developing again. Some nights, lying in the dark listening to my stomach growl, I wondered if I'd made the right choice. Maybe Janet's theft was just the price of having someone care about me. Maybe being systematically robbed was better than being completely alone. Maybe I should have kept my mouth shut and been grateful for whatever scraps of care came with the financial abuse. Then I'd remember the lake house. The casual way she talked about property values and investment opportunities while I'd praised her dedication. The way she'd inflated every expense and documented every theft as legitimate care. The way she'd stolen my future while making me grateful for her presence. Agent Gutierrez called in December with an update. They'd traced the diverted funds, documented the inflated expenses, and built a case that would likely result in criminal charges. The money was gone, spent on renovations and property taxes, and furnishing Janet's dream retreat, but there might be restitution possibilities if they could force the sale of the lake house. Mr. Coleman, I need you to know that your sister is facing serious federal charges, she said. Representative payee fraud is a felony. She could be looking at significant prison time. Prison time. My sister, who used to braid my hair when I was little, who taught me to drive, who'd held my hand through the worst trauma of my life, was going to prison because of choices she'd made and a complaint I'd filed. Is there any way to resolve this without criminal charges? I asked. That's not up to me. The evidence is clear, the amount is substantial, and there are federal guidelines that apply. But Mr. Coleman, I want you to understand something. Your sister didn't just steal money from you. She stole your autonomy, your dignity, and your ability to make informed decisions about your own care. That's not something that should be minimized or forgiven just because she's family. She was right, but knowing she was right didn't make it hurt less. The formal charges were filed on a gray January morning when the house felt colder than it should have and the silence stretched longer than it used to. Janet moved out the day before, taking boxes of belongings that had been purchased with money meant to keep me alive. I was alone in a house I couldn't afford, dealing with medical needs I couldn't meet, facing a legal process I didn't understand, all because I'd discovered that the person I trusted most in the world had been systematically destroying my future while caring for my present. But I was alive. Wounded, broke, abandoned, and scared, but alive. And for the first time in 2 years, every decision about my money, my care, and my future was going to be mine to make. Even if I wasn't sure I was strong enough to make them. The knock on my door came at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'd been surviving on disability advocate assistance and community support for 4 months, while the federal investigation crawled toward its conclusion. The person standing on my doorstep wasn't Agent Gutierrez or another government official. It was a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a professional smile, holding a camera crew behind her. Mr. Coleman, I'm Sarah Martinez from Channel 7 Investigates. We've been following your case through public court records, and we'd like to tell your story. I almost closed the door. The last thing I needed was more attention, more scrutiny, more people asking questions about how my own sister had managed to steal $68,000 from a disabled man without anyone noticing for 2 years. The federal charges against your sister were filed yesterday, Sarah continued. Representative payee fraud, wire fraud, and theft of government benefits. The documents show she used your disability money to purchase a vacation rental property while you went without basic necessities. Filed yesterday. Janet had been arrested, and I'd found out from a news reporter. We want to shine a light on representative payee abuse, Sarah said gently. This happens more often than people realize, and the victims are often the most vulnerable members of our community. Your story could help other people recognize the warning signs. I let them in, not because I wanted to be on television, but because I was tired of being invisible. Tired of being the disabled guy whose family took advantage of him. Tired of having my story told by other people while I sat quietly in the background, grateful for whatever scraps of dignity were thrown my way. The interview took 3 hours. Sarah asked tough questions about the financial abuse, about the family dynamics that had made it possible, about the systemic failures that had allowed Janet to operate unchecked for so long. She asked about the months I'd spent rationing medication and skipping meals while Janet renovated her lake house with money meant to keep me alive. What do you want people to understand about representative payee relationships? She asked toward the end. I want them to understand that disabled doesn't mean stupid, I said. I want them to understand that needing help doesn't mean giving up the right to know where your money goes. And I want them to understand that family relationships don't excuse financial abuse. The story aired on a Thursday evening during the dinner hour, when the most people would be watching. Sarah had done her homework. She'd obtained copies of Janet's payee reports, interviewed Social Security officials about oversight procedures, and even managed to get footage of the lake house that had been purchased with my benefits. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone rang constantly with calls from other disabled people who'd experienced similar abuse, from family members who suddenly recognized concerning patterns in their own situations, from lawyers who wanted to discuss civil remedies I hadn't known existed. But the call that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Danny, this is Marcus Rodriguez from the State Attorney General's office. We saw the Channel 7 investigation, and we'd like to discuss expanding our case against your sister. It turned out that Janet's crimes went beyond just stealing my benefits. The State Attorney General had been building a case against the property management company she'd used for her lake house rental, a company that specialized in helping people launder money through vacation rental properties. Janet had become a small fish in a much larger net. We can offer your sister a plea agreement if she cooperates with our investigation into the property management scheme, Marcus explained during our meeting at his downtown office. But we want to make sure you're comfortable with the terms. The plea agreement was elegant in its justice. Janet would serve 18 months in federal prison, pay full restitution of the stolen benefits plus penalties, and forfeit the lake house to the government for auction. The proceeds from the sale would go toward my restitution, and any remaining balance would be garnished from her wages for the next 10 years. But the most satisfying part wasn't the financial recovery. It was the requirement that Janet participate in a documentary about representative payee fraud that the Attorney General's office was producing in partnership with disability advocacy groups. The documentary filming was scheduled for a Saturday in March at the lake house before it went to auction. Janet would be required to walk through the property and explain how each room, each upgrade, each luxury feature had been paid for with money stolen from her disabled brother. I decided to attend. Janet looked smaller somehow when I saw her at the lake house. Prison clothes will do that to a person, but it was more than that. She looked diminished, deflated, like someone who'd finally run out of justifications for the unjustifiable. The documentary crew was professional but thorough. They filmed Janet in the renovated kitchen, acknowledging that the granite countertops had been paid for with money meant to buy my groceries. They recorded her in the master bedroom, admitting that the hardwood floors had been purchased with funds designated from my medical equipment. Tell us about the dock, the director prompted, leading Janet outside to the private waterfront that had been rebuilt and expanded with my stolen benefits. The dock renovation cost $12,000, Janet said in a flat voice. That money came from inflated equipment charges on my brother's disability reports. Equipment your brother didn't need? Equipment he didn't need at the prices I documented. While he was rationing his medication because there wasn't enough money for refills? Janet's voice cracked. Yes. I watched from my wheelchair on the deck, saying nothing. This wasn't about confrontation or family reconciliation. This was about accountability. This was about making sure that what happened to me was documented, understood, and used to protect other people in similar situations. The auction happened 2 weeks later. The lake house sold for $420,000, well above what Janet had paid for it, thanks to the improvements she'd made with my money. After legal fees and penalties, I received a check for $308,000 in restitution. It was more money than I'd ever had at one time, but it felt hollow. This wasn't lottery winnings or an inheritance or the result of smart investing. This was compensation for 2 years of systematic abuse by someone who was supposed to protect me. I used part of the money to hire my own care coordinator, someone who worked for me instead of managing me. I bought a modified vehicle so I could drive myself to appointments instead of depending on other people's schedules and goodwill. I moved into an accessible apartment where I could control my own environment and make my own decisions about everything from room temperature to meal planning. Most importantly, I started speaking at conferences about representative payee abuse. The Attorney General's office connected me with disability advocacy groups, and I discovered that my story wasn't unique. Thousands of disabled Americans were being financially exploited by family members who saw their role not as protection, but as access to a steady stream of government benefits. The documentary premiered 6 months later at a national disability rights conference. Janet's interview footage was powerful and damning, but the most impactful segment was my closing statement recorded in my new apartment. Representative payee relationships are supposed to protect vulnerable people, I said directly to the camera. They're not supposed to create vulnerability. If you're managing someone else's benefits, remember that those benefits represent their dignity, their independence, and their right to make choices about their own life. And if you're a disabled person whose benefits are being managed by someone else, remember that needing help doesn't mean giving up the right to ask questions. The documentary won a regional Emmy and was picked up by streaming services. More importantly, it led to legislative changes in representative payee oversight procedures and increased funding for disability advocacy programs. Janet was released from federal prison after serving 14 months. She never contacted me directly, but I heard through Mom that she was working at a grocery store in a different city, living in a studio apartment, and paying monthly restitution that would continue for 8 more years. Mom tried to broker a reconciliation once, calling me on Janet's birthday to suggest that enough time had passed for forgiveness and family healing. I listened to her talk about how Janet had paid her debt to society, and how holding grudges only hurt the person doing the holding. Mom, I said when she finished, Janet didn't steal money from society. She stole money from me. For 2 years, she systematically robbed a disabled person who trusted her completely. She didn't make a mistake or have a moment of poor judgment. She made a calculated decision to finance her dreams with my survival money. She's your sister. No, she's my former representative payee who committed federal crimes against me. There's a difference. I hung up and didn't answer. When she called back, the settlement money from my original accident finally came through 8 months later. $2.3 million that represented 3 years of legal battles and negotiations with insurance companies. It was enough to secure my long-term financial stability and fund the adaptive equipment and care I'd need for the rest of my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. If Janet had just waited, if she'd managed my benefits honestly and helped me through the legal process, she would have been well compensated for her time and effort when the settlement arrived. Instead, she'd thrown away our relationship and her freedom for a vacation rental property that she'd owned for less than a year. But perhaps that was the point. Janet hadn't stolen from me because she needed money. She'd stolen from me because she could. Because I was vulnerable and trusting and grateful for her help. Because the system was designed to protect me but had made me an easy target instead. I invested the settlement money conservatively and used the interest to fund a nonprofit organization that provides independent advocates for disabled people navigating benefit systems. We help people understand their rights, review their representative payee arrangements, and connect them with resources when they suspect financial abuse. We call it the Danny Coleman Foundation, and our slogan is simple: your benefits, your dignity, your choice. Because at the end of the day, that's what Janet had really stolen from me. Not just the money, but the dignity of making my own choices, and the autonomy to control my own life. She'd given those back to me in the worst possible way. But she'd given them back nonetheless, and I was going to make sure no one else had to lose them in the first place. 3 years later, I'm sitting in my accessible home office, reviewing grant applications for the Danny Coleman Foundation. We've helped over 800 disabled individuals identify and report representative payee abuse, recovered more than $4 million in stolen benefits, and successfully lobbied for stronger oversight legislation in 12 states. The stack of thank you letters on my desk tells stories that mirror my own. Sarah in Oregon discovered her son was using her Social Security payments to fund his gambling addiction. Michael in Florida found out his elderly mother had been redirecting his benefits to pay for her grandchildren's private school tuition. Each letter represents someone who found their voice, reclaimed their autonomy, and refused to accept financial abuse as the price of needing help. Yesterday, I received a call from Agent Gutierrez. She's been promoted to head the Representative Payee Fraud Division, and she wanted to let me know that prosecutions have increased by 300% since our case went public. The documentary continues to be used in training programs for Social Security administrators and disability advocates across the country. Janet's monthly restitution payments arrive like clockwork, deposited directly into the foundation's accounts. She'll be making those payments for 5 more years, which means for 5 more years her theft will be transformed into protection for other vulnerable people. There's a certain poetic justice in that mathematics. I still live independently, manage my own finances, and make my own choices about everything from breakfast cereals to medical treatments. The simple dignity of autonomy, something most people take for granted, feels precious when you've had it stolen and then fought to get it back. Mom sends Christmas cards now instead of calling. She's never quite forgiven me for pressing charges against Janet, and I've never quite forgiven her for thinking family loyalty should override financial crimes. We've reached a peaceful distance that works for both of us. The foundation keeps me busy, but it also keeps me connected to a community of people who understand that survival sometimes means standing up to the people who are supposed to protect you. We've learned that the opposite of family abandonment isn't family reconciliation. It's chosen family, built from people who show up not because they have to, but because they want to. Every morning when I wake up in my own space, surrounded by equipment I chose and paid for with money I control, I'm reminded that independence isn't about not needing help. It's about having the right to choose who helps you and how they help you. Janet made her choices, I made mine. And every day, people contact our foundation because they're ready to make theirs. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.